Welcome to Miles Ahead, the Canadian Points podcast brought to you by FrugalFlyer.ca, where we talk about all things miles points, a hobby that allows us to travel all over the world in style and on a budget. Today, we're coming to you live in a recording from Las Vegas at the annual Frugal Flyer team retreat. We're excited to be recording another episode together in the same room rather than a Google Meet. In this episode, we're going to give you a brief history of the miles and points game in Canada and where we see things going in the future. As a reminder, you can always find our timestamps in the show notes if you want to jump around to different sections or come back and listen to something again. Additionally, if you're enjoying what you hear, please leave us a review, a like, and rating on your favorite podcast platform. We read all of the feedback, and reviews are particularly helpful and help us tremendously. For this live recording, we've got the whole Frugal Flyer team here to help you get a better idea of the history of miles and points game in Canada. Before we get into that, we've got the classic Guess That Card segment. Listeners should be familiar with the segment by now, but if you're new here, I've pre-selected a rewards credit card and will provide hints to help everyone get on the right track to identify it. The team will use those hints to guess Family Feud style as quickly as possible until the card is recognized. Each presenter will get one attempt to guess that card after each set of hints is revealed, so they must use their guesses wisely. The presenter with the correct answer will hold eternal bragging rights over their colleagues and join me for a short chat to discuss why we at Frugal Flyer may or may not recommend that card. So, my first set of hints for Guess That Card. This card allows cardholders free checked bags and priority boarding on a specific airline. The card art may make you feel extra fancy, like you've got a spotlight on you.
Ding, ding.
Go ahead, Quentin. Make your guess. Buzz in. You have to have a guess.
I don't know.
Okay, Josh, go ahead. No? Yes?
Is it the BMO?
Yeah, that's what I was going to
DI Porter World Elite MasterCard?
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
Josh is the winner.
Raccoon. Yeah.
The raccoon in a tuxedo, feeling extra fancy with a spotlight directly on him. So, Josh, first off, do you hold this card yourself?
So I don't yet. At the time of recording, the card only came out a couple of weeks ago. And so I think it's still rolling out for those who are interested in applying. I don't hold it currently. I'll be honest, I haven't flown Porter Airlines yet myself. Being based in Edmonton, we do a lot more travel on WestJet and Air Canada. But I see the value that's there. And I know at least one other team member, Quentin, has already added the card to his wallet.
That's right. Even though he was a little slow on the trigger, Quentin, how is your experience?
Do you have the physical card yet, or are you still waiting for it in the mail?
I'm still waiting for it in the mail. I do love the Porter raccoon. I think he's absolutely adorable. I think other airlines need to have a mascot. But it's been a great card. I actually got it just before we came to Vegas, and I flew Porter to Vegas. All the benefits came in. So I got priority boarding, like what was in the description, free checked bags, a great service, in-flight Wi-Fi, the whole nine yards. And it's a kind of a game changer because there's really very few options we have in Canada for credit cards getting elite status on airlines. So it's a game changer. I think a lot of people are going to start looking at Porter as a huge competitor, especially in Eastern Canada. And I personally fly Porter a lot when I go see my family in Sault Ste. Marie. So it's going to be a workhorse in my RC.
So about how long did it take for the benefits to apply to your Porter account after you applied for the card?
I would say about 4 hours after I got approved, where I got an email from BMO and Porter saying that the benefits have now gone onto my account. A bit of a snafu in which they created a new Porter account for me for some odd reason. But after just messaging the customer service team at Porter, they were able to merge my accounts on the back end. And yeah, I would say total 5 hours. And I got to choose my seats days in advance of our trip to Vegas here.
Yeah. So I think the real value play is if you are going to buy the basic quarter fare, this gives you all the benefits of a more expensive quarter fare, except for the cancellation. That's the only big thing. Anybody else have anything else to add?
It's a great card. Great card. Highly recommend.
Yeah. And a nice keeper card. I think when we do the What's in Our Wallet next year, I think a few of us are going to have that Porter card in there. All right. Well, congratulations to Josh on successfully guessing that card. Enjoy your bragging rights while we move on to learning to get miles ahead, how the Canadian points game has changed. So with this How the Game Has Changed section, basically what we're going to do is an oral history of the miles and points community in Canada, what the strategies used to be kind of pre-pandemic, and then how it changed during the pandemic, which was a big time for changing travel in general. But then also after the pandemic, we've seen a significant change in the offers that are available, the strategy in terms of how to accrue tons and tons of points and stack up for that significantly discounted vacation. And that's basically how this is going to work. So we're going to jump in the time machine and we're going to zip our way back to 2015 to 2018. And we're going to hear from some of our most experienced points collectors here in this section. So we're going to hear from a lot of Jeff, a lot of Kirin, and then of course, Josh and Reed, our founders, as they were around in this time. And I can't speak for Quentin. I want to say 2019 or 2020 is when you first dove in, Quentin?
Yeah, I did. I jumped in around 2019, kind of nearing the end of my university game. So relatively still wide-eyed compared to our more seasoned folk around too.
Yes, and we love to hear stories about the good old days where you had to walk uphill both ways for 30,000 Aeroplan points in the snow, wind chill of -30, very Edmonton weather. And if anybody listening is not familiar, Edmonton is the home base of Frugal Flyer.
I would like to interrupt for a minute.
Yes, of course.
And we liked it.
Yes, and walked uphill both ways for 30,000 Aeroplan points in -30 with flip-flops, no winter boots, and you enjoyed every moment. Absolutely. Okay, so getting into the good old days.
Now that I've made my terrible boomer joke, I would actually like to call upon one of the founders of the site, my very good friend, Mr. Josh Vendura, because he, I know, was doing some really king, shall I say, degen, or shall I say, savvy maneuvers back in the day.
Yeah, so I think I started in miles and points probably around 2015. The first card I ever got was the WestJet RBC World Elite MasterCard from an actual miles and points standpoint. And since then, I guess in the past 10 years, we've seen so much development. And, I think early on, way back, we used to have cards such as it was like a Chase Marriott card in Canada back before Marriott Bonvoy was a thing. And this Chase card, it was like the only card that Chase issued in Canada. And it was like $1,000 minimum spend or something really small on it. And you got 50,000. Was it 50,000 points or something? It was a really good bonus anyways. And you could just get as many of these cards as you wanted. And it came with a free night. And that was back when Marriott pricing was really normal, I guess you could say, more so than it is today.
For context, Josh, what could 50,000 Marriott Bonvoy buy you back in the good olden days?
Like 50,000 Marriott points back in 2016, 2015, you could book whatever the hell you wanted. Pretty much. It was just unfettered. And so you could get, it'd come with a free night, you get 50,000 points. And it really felt like when you were earning Marriott points, like the bonus on a card really got you a long way towards your next redemption, whereas not as much in recent times.
Even the bonuses now, you're seeing similar numbers, like 50,000, maybe 100,000. But
so many kind of iterations of devaluation over the years, right? So that sticks out to me the most. And that was one of those cards that it was really sad when they left Canada. And interestingly enough, when Chase exited the credit card market in Canada, if anybody had balances at that point, they just were like, screw it, we're just going to pay everybody's balances and we're out. So I'm sure some people made off really great from that. Not great to have a ton of credit card debt, but shit, if you had 10K sitting on there, Chase really did people well on that. So that sticks out to me as one of the most impactful back in the day. We only have two Marriott Bonvoy cards in Canada now. And like Reed said, the bonuses are similar to what I mentioned, but with 10 years of devaluation built in now. So we also had a lot of opportunity back in the day with Aeroplan. And I know, Jeff, you played around with Aeroplan a lot and still do. So, where did you live back in the day?
Yeah, so I don't know if people made any. We're talking about the old orange Aeroplan.
Yes.
Remember?
Yes, that's right.
I still have my card in my drawer
exactly.
when my parents signed me up for it.
Well, and back when Aeroplan and Air Canada were two separate companies, right? Like there was a very wide period of time when Air Canada did not own their own loyalty programs.
Right.
But please continue, Jeff.
Yeah, so Aeroplan back in those days was actually a lot more difficult to book than it is today. Nowadays, we can just go online and generally find exactly what we want. But that wasn't the case back then. You had to piece together your own itinerary and then always have to call in because these These were itineraries that you couldn't book online. So you had to call in, feed your itinerary to the agent and pray that it actually worked.
And pray that they knew what they were doing
Yes.
too. Like not all Aeroplan reps in the day and still today are made equal, to say the least.
And and the advantage of this was, for those that remember at the time, Aeroplan had crazy surcharges with certain airlines that always seemed to be the ones that the search engine preferred. And we're talking about Lufthansa and Air Canada.
That was the irony, of course. It was that this was the Air Canada program, and you could get a nice low cost redemption in Aeroplan points, except you would be paying for the entire privilege of the fuel.
$1,000 at minimum.
Wow. $1,000 fuel surcharges
At minimum.
on like domestic Air Canada flights? Is that
So we're talking about international business.
international? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I think the point was, whilst that still represented the steep discount, it was very much violating the spirit of the entire affair.
Without a doubt.
Oh, it feels way less free when you're
Yes.
paying $1,000 per person. I mean, it's kind of like the modern day British Airways Obvious. If that was to make a comparison.
Now, in its defense, back in the day, those of us amongst our number who were august and wealthy enough to be members of the super elite status got that waived.
That's right.
We got fuel surcharges waived.
That's right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. That's crazy.
At the time, I was making 50K though, so yeah, that wasn't happening for me.
Right. Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, so under the old Aeroplan, you could string together up to 16 segments in business class at a flat rate,
Wow.
which is, unheard of in today.
And what was that flat rate?
So, for example, if you wanted to fly to the Middle East, it would have been, I'm going to say 80 or it was either 80 or 85,000 Aeroplan.
Wow. 80,000 Aeroplan, and you could put 16 segments on that one itinerary.
Yes,
And it didn't matter the distance flown.
it did not. It was only region based.
So we could be talking about like 5,000 Aeroplan points per segment
Right.
for an international business class.
Yep.
That's crazy.
And Aeroplan included free stopovers at the time too.
Free. And how many stopovers could you put?
Two on each end. So you could fly to do a stopover on the way to your destination.
Yep.
And then a stopover on your way back to your origin.
Okay, so very similar to what it is now.
Well, there's only Aeroplan only allows you to do once. Okay, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, because it's one on each end.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, it is the same as it is now.
Right.
But they were free.
They were free. Yeah.
Yeah. So different than it is now for anybody listening.
Yep.
It's 5,000 Aeroplan points per stopover today. It was free back in the day. So a little bit different.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah, so those were kind of what I call the glory days. It's not like that anymore. But I mean, and the Aeroplan, of course, wasn't the only program back in the day. But I know Reed has used other programs. Which ones did you like?
Yeah, so a program and set of cards I'm really missing these days is the Alaska Airlines co-branded cards from MBNA. These are cards we lost in the COVID era. So the partnership was pulled, but back in the day, these cards were a really, really good way to earn Alaska miles in plentiful quantities. And Alaska is still a really good program, partly because it's just very hard to earn them. But yeah, these are some great cards that definitely I miss from having in my wallet.
And what kind of redemptions would you do with Alaska, Reed?
So, I mean, things like Japan Airlines, Cathay, I don't know what else. Qatar. Yeah, Qatar being an option. And the fees are usually pretty good.
Right. And you can still do those redemptions today. It's just we don't have any meaningful way to earn Alaska miles in Canada anymore. I think that's the biggest change that used to be great in the good old days, quote unquote, but we don't have those cards, which sucks.
Yeah.
Those,
but it's a silver lining because I think because there's not a good way, even in the US, it's pretty hard to earn Alaska. So I think because of that, it's also one of the programs that's seen possibly the least devaluation comparatively to the average program.
Yep. Those Alaska cards, for the average Canadian, like who's going to sign up for an MBNA Alaska card? But for those who knew, they knew and they benefited greatly.
And the card itself was actually a good card because it did come with a package, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So aside from just the points, the card actually got some use.
Yeah. Sharon, any thoughts on Alaska?
Yes, actually. So Alaska represented something that I think was more generally indicative of the entire Canadian banking system, which was that a lot of the products were highly experimental. They represented, for example, segments of the populace or segments of the market, which aren't necessarily represented today. So Alaska being an option for Canadians wasn't intuitive, but it was offered on the market. MBNA at the same time offered, for example, a variety of affinity cards with universities. So if you spent on it, it would give some money to that university's association. These products have since gone the way of the dodo in the post-COVID era as the market has consolidated. Overall, I think this is just sort of indicative of where the banking system was at the time, which was that the IT infrastructure was clunky and hadn't been particularly updated. And there was a very strong incentive, a very strong desire to get products into customers' hands as much as possible. The algorithms approved people much more often. And on top of that, terms and conditions simply weren't as enforced stringently. This was because fewer people were doing the miles and points game. People didn't know how to do it as well. And like I made the joke about going uphill both ways in the snow for the 30,000 bonus points, but that really was a lot of points back in the day. These represented a lot. Points were seen by loyalty programs, and this is my personal belief back then, more as a loss leader to drum up potential revenue cash business than they were as a way to basically make revenue off of selling points to financial institutions to hand out as incentives for signing up for new cards. It's a very fancy way of saying that back in the day, they'd take the hit to try and get you into a Marriott, so you might pay for a Marriott with cash. And today, they basically want to make cash by selling a hell of a lot of Marriott points to a bank who will then give it to you, but they don't go as far.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, very eloquent for sure. And it's really the business plan that we'll talk about, but the loyalty programs love selling their points. And in some cases, as we saw with United Airlines, the loyalty program of United, Mileage Plus, is actually more profitable and a more valuable entity than United Airlines itself, which is a total paradox.
I think that's
here.
the case for a lot of US airlines.
It's just weird to think about. Yeah. So that being said, like everything was great back in the day, but things were also different. So I went back through a spreadsheet of all my card openings that I've done over the years. And in November 2018, so a little under, or I guess 6.5 years ago, a good welcome bonus on the American Express Gold Rewards card was 25,000 membership reward points. Like that was worth signing up for. That was worth doing the spend for. And it was a no-brainer, right? And it's crazy how in 6.5 years, we go from that to where, modern day, you see bonuses of 100,000, 150 in the States, 250,000 membership rewards points. And we'll get more into that down the line and why those changes have happened. But it's really weird looking it's almost like an inverse in my spreadsheet when I go chronologically as to how the welcome bonuses were back in the day compared to now. It's just quite the shift. So we've seen some inflation there, whether that's good or bad, to be determined. But
So the good old days had their positives and negatives. Definitely points were less accessible for sure than they are today. And part of that was the pandemic, that nobody was traveling and the banks really wanted people to continue opening new accounts and signing up for more cards so that they could hit their targets and sell more points, make more money, have more annual fees and all that good stuff. So Quentin, what were some of the things that you noticed during the pandemic that impacted miles and points?
So yeah, I got into the game kind of, like you said, 2019 and then into the pandemic. The biggest thing that I've noticed was that the welcome bonuses compared to now and pre-pandemic, I guess, just based off of anecdotes from other people at the team, were just a lot higher. The public offer for the Cobalt card as of filming this today is 15,000 membership rewards for, I can't remember, I'm off the top of my head, I don't know what the minimum spend is.
It's a lot of spend and it's a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to mess that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just seems like the barrier of entry now is a little bit harder in terms of getting your welcome bonus as well as the points. But back then we would routinely see the base offer was 30,000 membership rewards points, as high as 45,000, 50,000 regularly. So I think the pandemic, because people were spending less, people were traveling less, it was just more enticing for banks and financial institutions to increase the number of points you get so that you go try to spend money and you're more enticed to travel. But nowadays, now that we're in a revenge travel phase, people are just getting out more and traveling more. And the bar for welcome bonuses has dropped and the minimum spend seems to be creeping up slowly.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Quentin. The sign-up bonuses that we saw during the pandemic were all-time highs. And if you're waiting for that 50,000 point Cobalt offer to come back before you apply, stop waiting, because I don't think it's coming back based on the current trends that we're seeing things. But we're going to get to that in our third segment of the show. I mean, some of the other things that we noticed during the pandemic was the money was really cheap for banks. Like it was really easy for them to get their hands on more capital. So the lending standards were going down in that Amex would approve almost anybody with a pulse for cards, and they didn't care how many you had already. They would give you a credit limit of even $500 if you had a lot of other credit, and you would go get a full welcome bonus. So that was one thing that changed a lot. But we also had some players in the space leave, right? And Jeff, who did we lose as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so something that we're desperately short of in Canada are what we refer to as transferable points currencies. And one of those was HSBC at the time, which actually issued a really good card, the HSBC World Elite card, which allowed access to transfer partners that were really valuable in Canada because they were the only transferable currency that was available to those programs. And we're talking about Singapore KrisFlyer, which a lot of people like, Cathay Pacific, I believe.
Avios, British Airways.
Oh, British Airways, Avios. Yeah, okay, yeah, they were too. Yeah. And I believe they also had fairly frequent transfer bonuses. So it was a nice option. And HSBC got out by RBC. Cards were migrated over RBC, and it was a good card. And unfortunately, no longer available.
Demolished it.
Yeah.
I think, and that card also had a no foreign transaction.
It was one of the few non-Scotiabank cards that actually has that benefit.
Yeah.
It's tough to see them lose that.
I think we all expected RBC to introduce with that purchase their own no foreign transaction fee card, and they didn't do that. So
Now a bunch of people just have Avion cards that were useless to them, right?
So luckily, the people that did have the HSBC World Elite MasterCard did get a foreign transaction fee waiver. But Kirin, you've got something to add.
Yes. So we've spoken about what the effects of basically having extremely low interest rates and a policy of fiscal quantitative easing, also colloquially known as money printer go burr, had upon the financial markets and on the miles of points markets. Banks were able to borrow a lot of money. They printed a lot of points to raise capital. So they gave out the cards to get money coming back in. This would have effects outside of the pandemic because at the time, as a result of COVID-19, travel itself was frozen. People as a whole did not really go anywhere, but they sat on all those welcome bonuses that they made. So that meant that we came out the other side of the tunnel in 2022, 2023. People had quantities of points that had previously simply not existed in liquid format on the market ever before. And I think as we're going to see in the next section, this had a disastrous effect upon the demand side versus the supply side, because the supply of the award flights basically remained the same, oftentimes at fixed or subsidized rates that had been based upon pre-pandemic assumptions about the number of points in circulation, how many total points there were. And post-pandemic, those prices did not make sense any longer with the amount of points that were floating around. And that is what, in some ways, has hurt us today. And that's why we sort of reminisce about the good old days with 30,000 Aeroplan points uphill both ways in the snow in Edmonton winter were completely acceptable.
That's right. An excellent point. And Josh, what were some of the earning opportunities that we saw during the pandemic? Because there were a lot of companies that did some interesting stuff to try and get cash flow into their business, like Mogo, Crypto.com. What can you share with everybody about that?
Yeah, we saw many fintechs actually come up around that time. Mogo was a prepaid card that you could load with a credit card and play around with that. And that was great. Revolut was another similar thing that you could just cash load that it didn't quote as a cash advance. So there was a lot of fintech popping up with a lot of venture capital, and they were just really willing to just kind of let anything fly, to the point where if you did something they didn't like, they said, don't do that. And you would say, okay. And then you would just do it again. And it didn't matter. Kirin had a good point. Like, people ended up with such large point balances during the pandemic. And I admittedly leaned off the gas a little bit during it because of the lack of travel. But in that time period, I heard a lot about people actually selling miles of points and trying to just use miles of points in any way they could just to use those balances. And, you know, whether it's they're selling it to brokers or using it for friends and family and having them pay cash, like, people just weren't traveling. And, you know, people wanted to earn, of course, because bonuses were good, but there just wasn't, you know, anything to use them on. Then those who did travel had some really great trips, I'm sure, because nobody was traveling. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think the institutions are sympathetic to that as well, because what you would often see is cards that came with credits for certain benefits, they would give extensions or like to the like expiry of those benefits by a year. And sometimes it happened again during COVID. So it would be like a 2-year extension on your free night that you weren't able to use because you can't travel. So
Yes, and just to add to that, I think we should point out now that due to the strengthening of language of terms and conditions for a variety of loyalty programs, we here at Frugal Flyer strongly discourage anybody from engaging, say, points brokers or something like that. That could be very dangerous for both your points balances and your ability to participate with loyalty programs going forward. That was a gray area that has previously been, I don't want to say permitted or accepted, but it had previously been occurring. And now it is definitely something that is subject to intense levels of scrutiny. So we strongly recommend that you don't do it if you value this hobby.
Yeah, don't put your loyalty accounts at risk. Straight up, it's not worth it. And there's a lot more scrutiny on stuff like that these days. Exactly.
Yeah, and another thing we saw during the middle of the pandemic was companies like American Express, because rather than customers having these enormous balances of MR points that they had no reason to transfer to Aeroplan, they actually increased the cash out rate.
That's right.
For some of these programs. For example, I believe the American Express Platinum bumped the cash out rate to 2 cents per point. Someone may be able to correct me.
No, I think that's right. Because I cashed out for like a laptop for my partner at some point. So I was just like, that's great value.
It was only for specific programs. Like Apple was one of them.
Yeah. It was something.
If I can interject here, I actually remember. So I can't speak to US Platinum, but in Canada,
it was definitely
the Canadian Platinum. The way that worked was that there was a very short period in the pandemic, which was prior to the effects of quantitative easing and money printer broker coming into effect, when cards had terrible sign-up bonuses. I'm talking 25,000 points for a new platinum sign-up. This was a 6-month window. It was only a 3 to 6 month window. And in that window, they had a promotion, which was you would earn double. So if you were going for like dining, and at the time dining was actually 3x. So dining would actually go to 6x, and you could redeem on cash purchases for 2 cents per point. So basically, eating out would get you a net 12% cash back.
A good memory.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that what also needs to be remembered here is that one of the huge reasons that this was being done was because, yes, Amex had to pay this out at like basically via cash. But what it did was it had the net effect of burning liabilities off their books. All of those outstanding points, which would have been a liability on the book, suddenly got burnt. They had to pay cash, but they still had cash flow. So it made them look a lot better in the context of like just a really weird pandemic economy. And it got rid of a lot of those liabilities that they were holding. So that was part of the reason that they did that promo. It went the way of the dodo, but like, just for the listeners in the home, that's probably not coming back barring some kind of ridiculous like crisis again.
But it was an interesting period of time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. And Jeff, you had another thing to add.
Yes. One other thing I remember is Aeroplan. When Aeroplan purchased their program back and brought it in-house, they actually launched it right at the beginning of the pandemic. It was horrible timing for them. And they introduced all these new co-branded cards. And of course, they wanted to get them out there. So the welcome bonuses on the co-branded Aeroplan cards, especially at American Express, were outstanding. The Aeroplan Reserves were brand new cards at the time. And the welcome bonus at the time was 100,000 points. And then 10x on dining and grocery up to $5,000 equal to 50,000 points.
Yes, basically 150K.
Yeah. So for those that got in on that welcome bonus, we were all pleasantly surprised to learn that for whatever reason, IT glitch, the cap was never implemented. And so for those that were able to take advantage.
Yeah, it was like, what, 8 months or 10 months of 10x on dining and groceries.
Of that glitch. Yeah. You could, and I mean, when you're talking about grocery stores, people that are listening probably know what we're talking about.
Yeah. 506.95. If you know, you know. Quentin, anything else you want to tap?
Yeah, like along the similar lines of Jeff, like the Aeroplan bonuses were just huge. Like even just a first year free Visa Infinite from TD and CIBC, we're offering 70K, 80K points.
It was nuts.
Actually, this reminds me of something with the buddy passes. You guys remember those where you could have the buddy pass on top of your 30,000 point welcome bonus, and then you could cash out your buddy pass into 30K points.
That's what I did.
First year free, $1,000 min spend for 60K Aeroplan. It was crazy.
It was nuts.
So you would just kind of, within reason, shop around your loyalty to different banks and get Aeroplan cards.
Yeah.
Even the no annual fee CIBC card had, I think it was like $20K or something like that for no money exchange at all. I miss those days.
Yeah, Quentin. So we definitely all miss those days of multiple Aeroplan sign-up bonuses, and even the terms allowed you to get another Aeroplan sign-up bonus 12 months after you got your previous one. So it literally invited you to keep on extending your membership. Those have changed now in 2022 and 2023. The biggest thing since travel has come all the way back, at least for Canadians, is the implementation of Aeroplan new card bonus rules. And I've got an excellent article that describes what you can do, what you can't do, how to make sure that you stay on the good side of Aeroplan now, where they are limiting membership. And I understand why they did it, but there's lots of other things other than the Aeroplan new card bonus rules that have changed in 2022, 2023, and then even now in 2025. So then on top of the new card bonus rules coming into play, we've also had the way that welcome bonuses are delivered to change significantly. Reed, what can you tell us about the way that welcome bonuses are now delivered?
Yeah, unfortunately, the structure of welcome bonuses, and this is a trend that's taken on not just Aeroplan cards, not just one bank, but almost the majority of banks now have a structure where the welcome offer is split out into different components. So the first component will still usually be based on either first purchase or a spend requirement. And then there'll be another, sometimes quite large component of the bonus that will require you to spend in month 13 to month 14,
17 usually.
17. And so basically to get that bonus, you're required to keep the card for past a year. So you're on the hook you have to plan for paying 2 annual fees essentially.
Yeah, and that sucks on the more expensive cards. Like the Aeroplan Reserve card is probably the biggest offender for the month 14 to 17 offer. And it means you have to pay $1,200 in annual fees in order to get your 100,000 Aeroplan, or even less than that sometimes, 80,000 Aeroplan is what they're offering these days.
The Canadian Platinum card is also a really big offender on that one. $7.99 times 2 is a lot harder to swallow than times 1.
I agree with you, and that's another change that's happened where the annual fees of a lot of cards have gone up. However, the Canadian Platinum card, in my opinion, pretty easy to make that a $400 annual fee card. But Josh, you can probably attest to it.
Kirin holds that card. Keeps that card.
Yeah. Kirin, how do you make your $799 MX Platinum a $400 annual fee effectively?
Well, due to being an exceptionally handsome and very interesting international man of mystery, I'm able to utilize the $200 dining credit at one of the short list of needlessly overpriced restaurants on the American Express dining credit list. And then there's an additional $200 travel credit that can be liquidated via a variety of shenanigans or used legitimately on a variety of travel purposes. Now, I will be honest, I do not receive that $799 annual fee with a great deal of happiness every time that it comes in.
Yeah.
But I am able to swallow it because, frankly, I just need to hear that anodized aluminum slap on the bar table whilst the normies peer on with a mixture of shock, awe, and admiration, which they doubtlessly do because clearly all persons at all times are paying attention to the payment solutions being utilized by persons other than themselves and do not, in fact, not care about that. That would just shatter my self-image and self-worth.
So I think it's interesting because the American Express Platinum card is a good example where the credits on it are pretty good.
I think so.
Pretty easy to use. We've seen it a little bit in Canada, but it's really noticeable with US credit cards these days is annual fees go up, but hey, we gave you another $10 a month credit to use at some random restaurant and they sell the shit out of it like it's a benefit. And so, we're at the start of the year. It's April now. Across all my US cards that I have, I've already cashed out over $3,500 in credits on them just through airline credits and Dell credits and Hilda credits and all of that, which great, it's money back, but it's such a hassle. It's not even funny.
You've got to be a gymnast almost.
Oh,
with your
it's
financials.
nuts. And you need a spreadsheet to make sure you're not missing a thing because it's quarterly, monthly, yearly, semi-annually. It's nuts.
It is nuts, but the one card that I think has actually come out a little bit, or the two cards that come out a little bit on top of the Surpass, the Hilton Surpass and the Hilton Aspire. I feel like
they're both US cards.
Yeah. We're just on the topic of coupon books. It's not all bad.
No,
there are some opportunities for for coming out on top. Those are the two cards I can think of off the top of my head. The Venture X is another one that most people can come out ahead with how they structure their travel credit and bonus points. But yeah, overwhelmingly a lot of coupons, and no, I don't like the increased cost, but if you kind of play the game a little bit, you can recoup a lot of it.
It represents the trend that we see, and we'll talk about it a bit with the way things are now. No bank is ever going to come back and say, yeah, haha, annual fee is too high, we're going to lower it. Never going to happen.
Never.
It's either going to go up or it's going to stay the same. And when it goes up, just human nature, they're trying to justify it, and sell it to, oh, well, it's now $8.99 instead of $7.99, but you get this. Typically, what you now get is not as great as $100 cash in my pocket. So it's been interesting to see it trend that way. And it's, like I mentioned, more in the States, but we're starting to see pockets of it in Canada here and there.
Yeah. Jeff? Yeah. And like you said, I think we're going to keep seeing more and more of this. This is going to be something that's going to be expanded to almost all cards eventually. And this was also mostly just exclusive to American Express, but we're seeing now other banks take notice of these coupons.
Well, and it's not just banks, it's airlines too. So like United just completely redid their Chase co-branded credit card lineup. And essentially what they did is they took everybody's bad ideas about couponization and did a much worse job of implementing it. Kirin, you've got something to share.
Yes. So here's the thing. As much as we criticize the couponization and call it bad, correct, it is bad from the consumer perspective. If you are a maximalizing consumer trying to get the most value out of something and to wring that blood from that stone, the reason that couponization works as a tactic is that it is a consumptive tax on the consumer. What they're doing is that they're saying, we will give you a bonus that we pay for the subsidy, but you have to pay cash. So you put cash into the system and they will give you a small reward out of it on the other end. But at the end of the day, you have to not only spend cash, you have to spend a minimum level of cash in order to even reap the rewards. So ultimately, whoever is using that is almost always coming out on head, at least as a net average. So that's why it's being done. I mean, my argument here would be very simple. If you don't like it and don't engage with the system, like cancel your products. So people aren't canceling their products. People are engaging with the couponization. That just incentivizes this cycle to continue. I don't see it going away, unfortunately. That doesn't mean that everything is going to be doomed to it for all eternity. For example, if in the future consumers just have less cash to spend, I think some of the couponization will actually go away. But ultimately, it happens because it's an effective way to use discounts, which are bought by the issuing bank or by the merchants at a discount in exchange for hard cash money.
Yep. No, all really good points. Josh.
Yeah. So we've seen annual fees go up. We've seen welcome bonuses shipped and whatnot. But what we haven't chatted about yet is we've seen loyalty programs shift in the last couple of years as well. And so, way back in the day, it was all award charts and standard pricing, and hotels had categories and everything. It was super easy to figure out, I want to stay here. I want to go here. It's going to cost me X. Not the case overwhelmingly. Things have shifted very heavily in the last few years for nearly all programs, hotel and frequent flyer programs. They've mostly shifted to dynamic pricing, which is not great.
So for those of us who don't know what dynamic pricing is, it's essentially when there's an increase in demand for, let's say, a flight or a hotel, let's say during March break or summer vacation or spring break. These are great examples of that. Hotels and airlines are going to price them higher because they know that people are going to buy them, and they can drain our points a little bit faster. Dynamic pricing has kind of start to quote unquote plague our game because there's a lot of points out there from people accruing them during the pandemic, and these sign-up bonuses higher than ever before. So they understand that we have more points, and to drain our points a little bit faster for us to kind of keep chasing that carrot, they dynamically price them, and we're stuck with this system that isn't necessarily that favorable to us in the points and miles game.
Yeah. It's like Uber surge pricing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Great way of.
Yes. The dynamic pricing has been implemented to almost mimic the cash value. So Aeroplan has kind of pegged their program at about 2 cents per point. But Jeff, tell us some examples of what's changed in the Aeroplan program as we move from the old Aeroplan into the new one.
Right. Yeah. So as everyone has said, there's a lot of points out there. And so what airlines are beginning to adopt are these dynamic prices where we're seeing 300,000 Aeroplan points for a business class flight from Toronto to Europe, which we all know is crazy. But that's kind of resulted in for those of us that are maximizers in programs kind of being, some programs are rising in prominence and others are losing their value. For example, Air France KLM is not that accessible in Canada. So I kind of feel like Air France KLM has kind of risen in prominence slightly.
I agree.
And programs like Aeroplan and Marriott have lost a lot of what they once had.
They've lost some allure for sure. Yeah.
And like other programs like Hilton, I think have really risen in status for people that are out there to like really maximize their points. So the whole system, I think, is quite cyclical. Programs are up, other programs are down. And, you know, in a few years, the tides are going to shift one way or another. And so what we do is obviously what we're going to try to always do is search out where those deals are and go there. So there's really not much you can do with Aeroplan. I know we still love Aeroplan because there's still a lot of value there, but you just need to be able to shift where your goals are depending on where the industry is at the time.
Yeah. And there's still lots of sweet spots and ways to save. Reed, what are some of the best ways to avoid dynamic pricing?
Yeah. So, I mean, with Aircon specifically, there's kind of two things you can do. You can either work within dynamic pricing or you can try to avoid it still. The way to do it right now is to seek out partner airlines other than Air Canada to use your Aeroplan points for. And so there's still quite a few airlines out there that are on a fixed points redemption schedule.
But aren't there partners, Reed, that actually have become dynamic over time?
Yeah, we have just recently actually seen some partners other than not just Air Canada, but some other partners are now being dynamically priced. But still the vast majority of partners are fixed price. So you can look to make redemptions with those. And otherwise you can try to work within dynamic pricing if you just kind of have a consumer forward points conscious approach where, if you see those redemptions that are 300,000, you've got to be willing to just not make those. And sometimes you do see with dynamic pricing, there's good value redemptions. Kirin's talked about like premium economy, but sometimes be good price. So yeah, and also award search tools, which we've talked about before. That's something that came out of the pandemic, have made things really, really accessible. So it's very easy to make a search for a specific route and see what the options are for redeeming points. And, you'll see some are, maybe 80,000 and others are 200,000 or 300,000. And so then, like what is a good kind of benchmark.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a result of all these points being available is that all of the tech nerds, for lack of a better term, saw an opportunity that there's tons of people that have points and want to redeem them and need help. So these tools have been excellent. We've done a lot of different reviews of the different search tools, and we have some of our favorites. We were just discussing actually off air. Points Path is probably one of my favorites. You install it on Google Chrome and it'll show you the points price of the flight right next to the cash price. So we'll include a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to download that, it's probably the easiest way for a beginner to get an idea of how to use miles and points. And you start to see some of the opportunities to redeem Aeroplan points at good value or bad value and understand dynamic pricing and how it kind of plays into it.
All right. So is the hobby going the way of the dinosaur? Yes, a meteoroid is coming and we are all doomed. Everybody make and break for it. It's over. Of course not. I'm being as facetious as I possibly can. Miles and points is going to get harder. I want to be very frank about that. This is one of the most rewarding hobbies that there is because in absolutely no other place on the world, not even if you're a financial wizard, can you basically find a way where with simple hard work and dedication, you can start getting 10 to 20x what you put into it. And I do mean that consistently. I don't mean that once in a while. I don't mean that sometimes. I mean that as a consistent rate of return, maybe 5x. It just can't be done anywhere else and with very little downside if you're smart. Now, the issue with that comes down to the fact that because we've talked about dynamic pricing is here to stay. In fact, I think pretty much everything is going to go to dynamic pricing and the old fixed award price charts are going to go to the way of the dodo. Those are done. That doesn't mean that there's not an area for you to learn and to improve. It just means that systems mastery becomes more important. Learning different point systems, acquiring transferable points currencies, knowing where to put your transferable points currencies, following a just-in-time usage of your points currencies. That means that you don't transfer your transferable points based on speculation. You do it right before you make a booking because there's a great booking that has become available. That's all that means. Is this going to require time and investment from people or enthusiasts in this hobby? Absolutely, it will. But if you want to be dedicated, you can get absolutely ridiculous returns on your investment of time. And aside from that, let's just forget all of this miles and points, learning the nerdy stuff, looking through award tool and Seats Arrow to find award seats. Right now, you at home can improve your travel experience. You can travel the world more and pay less by doing something very simple. You can go and you can get one credit card that is better or more efficient than one of the other credit cards in your wallet. That's all that you got to do. You just got to get one card, take the Flyer Funds rebate, and even if it has no foreign transaction fees and you're buying things in foreign currencies when you travel, that's going to start saving you dollars, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. That can enhance your life right now, and that's something that you will have as a step up against all the people around you every day. So that would be how I'd leave the episode.
I kind of align with that. It's always going to get more difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Loyalty programs are never going to come out and say, "Oh wow, we devalued. We're actually just going to increase the value of everything and make super easy for redemption." It's never going to happen. I do think as it gets harder, there still is a ton of opportunity. So personally, in the last 12 months, I've made the most points I've ever made since I've started this in 2015. I do think the Canadian market is a little depressed, maybe, compared to what it once was, admittedly. Still a lot of opportunity there, a lot of really good credit products. The US market is unreal right now. And if you haven't looked at the US credit cards, we'll include our link to our guide in the show notes, but ton of good opportunity there. I think the thing most importantly, and Kirin really touched on it a lot about learning, you also just want to learn from others as you continue with this. If I look at what I knew in 2015 versus now or even 2 years ago, completely different. And so as long as you're, continuing to learn and developing and, connecting with others who are in this hobby, even if things do trend better or for worse, you'll probably come out better in the end.
Yeah, bet on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I alluded to earlier, things are very cyclical. And when we're talking about things in the financial space, there are periods of booms and busts. And if the pandemic kind of has shown us anything, that there's a lot of unpredictability. So you never know in 5 years, really, there's no way we can predict what's going to happen. So while we may have, an idea of what we think, don't know.
Yeah.
And the other thing we really talk about a lot about is use your points as fast as you possibly can. If you go into the Air Canada app and you click on the trips tab and it's full, and you go into your points balance and it says 0, you are doing things perfectly.
Yeah. Just off of a segue of that, I just wrote an article about Aeroplan family sharing, and Josh commended me on my screenshot of 11 Aeroplan points in my, which is the lowest a screenshot of a point balance that I've seen ever. So maybe I'll hold that. Maybe Jeff can beat me at 0 next time. But yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse here and say that it is going to be harder, but there is a lot of promise out there, right? I think banks and flying programs are understanding that there's people that take advantage of this program and they want to reel us in. And the greatest example of that just happened last week or 2 weeks ago with the BMO Porter World Elite MasterCard, where you're not just getting entry level elite status with it. You're getting the middle of the tier elite status where a lot of value is had. So people are watching what we're doing, and there's going to be growth in the area. It's going to be hard, but just take it step by step and don't try to leap too quickly, because there is a possibility of getting quote unquote hurt that way with annual fees and not being able to redeem your points. But one thing that really stuck with me when I first got into this hobby by a person who introduced it to me was there is no such thing as a free lunch. There is going to be some cost to everything that we do, whether that's annual fees, taxes, and surcharges. So don't think that you're going to fly for free or stay for free, but how can we minimize that cost as much as we can? And that's what we're really after. We're not traveling for free. We're traveling for significantly less. Reed?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. I think you guys have done a fantastic job kind of summarizing my thoughts as well. I'm still optimistic about where we are, so I don't think it's dead. I don't think points are going anywhere. But I will agree, like it's harder to get into now as someone who's brand new to it. You sort of need to get to that intermediate level of knowledge and even to that advanced level of knowledge in some cases to really get going and get making like redemptions on a consistent basis. So I think that's just the challenge that we see now. You can't really, as a beginner, just start out, earn points from one card and immediately make a redemption without knowing how to make the right redemption. And oftentimes you might need to earn points for more than one way or more than one avenue or more than one card to get to that number you need. But luckily there's a ton of great info out there, particularly on Frugal Flyer. So it's easier than ever to be a beginner and jump into that intermediate level of knowledge if you're willing to put in, a certain amount of work. So what about you, Danny?
Well, I appreciate you guys leaving me so much to talk about. But I think the sentiment that I want to leave everybody with is that a point I touched on earlier of the loyalty programs, and specifically the foreign loyalty programs, love selling more of their miles. Everybody has started to realize that selling loyalty points and airline miles is very profitable, that not a lot of consumers are going to use their airline points and miles to the maximum value. So they can sell them to the bank at 1 cent, then they get redeemed at like 0.7 cents. So it's a good thing for the financial institution. Even if things change with credit card interchange fees and all the wonderful stuff that makes our hobby happen, we are still going to be able to have this ecosystem of miles and points exist because it's profitable for the loyalty programs. They want us to keep engaging. They want us to sign up for more cards. And if that ever goes away, they're just going to figure out a way through shopping portals or rebates, spending offers to make it continue to happen. So miles and points is always changing. It's a cyclical thing like everybody else has said. But this is probably never going to go away fully because selling points and miles is such a profitable endeavor for the big banks. That brings us to the end of this episode of Miles Ahead. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you have any questions about the episode or anything we talked about, be sure to leave a comment on the episode page on FrugalFlyer.ca. And if you have a question you want us to answer on air, you can submit it on FrugalFlyer.ca/podcast. Bye, everybody.